Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with Mr. Snyder, and today we are going to discuss the women's rights movement of the 1960s. So in the 1960s and continuing into the 70s, American women launch a broad-based movement to expand their economic opportunities and attain equal rights. The women's movement fundamentally changes many aspects of American life, from family and education to careers and political issues. Today, the contributions of people of various gender groups continue to shape American culture. So if you remember, we've already talked about a feminist movement that was from the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention and ending in 1920 with only the right to vote. They were working for the right to vote, but that doesn't mean that women had full equality. In the 50s and 60s, the civil rights movement inspires women to demand gender equality because a lot of women drew parallels from how African Americans were treated to how women were treated. And they also taught them ways to get it. Now, what are the roots of this? It's that women are dissatisfied with their limited social roles. They got a taste of working and making a living for themselves in World War II, but when the men came back from war, they were the ones that had to go back home and play housewife. At least a lot of them did. So they are not happy with their stereotypical housewife role after World War II. And those that did go to work, because more women worked in the 1950s than ever before at that time, they demand equal treatment in the workplace because they're often discriminated against. They're either stuck in dead-end jobs and they have no hope of advancement, or they are threatened to lose their jobs. Being pregnant or becoming pregnant could be a way that women could be fired or denied leave from work or forced to take unpaid leave from work. So the women's rights movement starts with this idea of feminism, and feminism is just the theory of social, political, and economic equality for men and women. I'm a feminist. I would love to see women treated equally. And this was fueled by the book released and written by Betty Friedan called The Feminine Mystique. And it basically takes her role as a 1950s housewife, and it's not enough for them. They want more. So Friedan helps establish the National Organization for Women, or NOW. And their goal is to win equality of the sexes. And they're doing this with they have two major priorities, NOW does. They want to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA. It's not Earned Run Average, it's Equal Rights Amendment in this instance. They want to add it to the Constitution. That would guarantee gender equality under the law. Now, they already have anti-discrimination laws, but this would be added to the Constitution, and it would be the highest law in the land. They also want to protect a woman's reproductive rights. They want to give women the right to choose an abortion if they choose. They would like to preserve a woman's access to birth control, etc. So now, I like to think of them as the NAACP of the women's rights movement because they work through the courts and they work through the legal system, lobbying for reforms and taking court cases to force the government to enforce the anti-discrimination legislation that is already there. Other feminist organizations thought that NOW was too lenient. Some thought that NOW was too radical. So other groups protest the Miss America pageants, and their ultimate goal is to make personal issues political and tie the two things together. Gloria Steinem is a radical feminist and journalist and a political activist, and she actually takes an undercover role as a dancer at a Playboy club, and she exposes through journalism the humiliation that these Playboy models have to endure simply to make a living. And she founds Ms. Magazine, which is an American liberal feminist magazine, and the title is a reminder, or I guess it's a protest against women who feel that they have to take their husband's name, and with Ms., they're able to keep their own name. opposition to the women's movement. Some people weren't for this, and you would think they were all men, but some of them were even women. Phyllis Schlafly works tirelessly to defeat the Equal Rights Amendment, and her quote is, "Feminism is doomed because it attempts to repeal and restructure human nature." She doesn't believe that men and women are equal. She says if we pass the Equal Rights Amendment, it would compel women to serve in the military at this point. If everybody's equal, they would have to register for the draft. And remember, this is going on during Vietnam. It would also end the sex-segregated bathrooms, and it would hurt family life by taking women out of the home and putting them into the workplace. And even though the ERA, a lot of people pass it, it needs 37 states to become ratified, 3/4 of the 50, and it falls 3 states short of ratification. So what are some effects of this women's movement and the women who work tirelessly to expand women's rights? Well, in 1964, part of the Civil Rights Act that we've talked about with race also banned discrimination on the basis of sex. And that portion of that law was called Title VII. Title VII banned discrimination on the basis of sex. People who were opposed to the act put this in to make the law look too ridiculous to pass, and so it ends up backfiring on them. The Equal Employment Commission, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, is established by this law to enforce the prohibition of job discrimination and discrimination on the basis of sex. Maybe just as important is Title IX of the Higher Education Act of 1972. It bans discrimination in education. And so the largest effect on this happens to be on women's athletics, because the law requires the ratio of women to men participating in sports to mirror the ratio of men to women participating in the school. And so women's sports were so underfunded by that point that it really wasn't fair. They weren't being treated equally. Now it's opened up a lot of different possibilities for women's athletics. Here are some legacy information of Title IX for women. You can see now that we're paying more attention to women in education, from 1970 to 2000, the women with some college and college graduates in the workforce increases a lot. And the other side of that is that women still are not making as much as men for the same job. And that is one of the, we'll talk about that in a minute. Other effects, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act means that you cannot be denied credit, a credit card, a housing loan, things like that, based on your gender. And probably the most controversial item to come out of the women's movement is the abortion case, Supreme Court case, Roe versus Wade in 1973. And what this case does is the Supreme Court assures women the right to an abortion during the first 3 months of her pregnancy. She has the right to choose. Before this decision, because abortion was outlawed in states and severely restricted in other states, women tried dangerous and illegal ways to end their pregnancies, which would put their life at risk as well. And this case is still brought up today. The abortion issue is still extremely controversial. Other effects, occupations in medicine, law, and accounting, which were previously not open to women, now are. The percentage of women workers and married women workers has grown tremendously since 1950s. Some negative effects are women still earn less than men on average. Now, it's very, very hard to prove discrimination in cases like this. So even though it is on the books as illegal, it is very, very hard to enforce. Some sociological aspects of this include the pink-collar ghetto, which means that work in jobs that are dominated by women rarely lead to better careers. And also there is the concept of the glass ceiling, which is an unbreakable barrier that keeps women from rising up the corporate ladder in the workplace, regardless of their qualifications for the positions. And then lastly, the majority of the nation's poor people, or people in poverty, are single women and single mothers. They work lower paying jobs and have fewer benefits simply because of their lack of time to achieve the qualifications, because they're stuck parenting, and also they're stuck parenting. That was the second part of that. Here you can see the average earnings of full-time year-round workers by educational attainment in 2006. And so men and women not being paid the same amounts if they have less than a 9th grade degree, 9th to 12th grade degree, high school graduate, some college, your associates, bachelor's, master's, professional, and doctorate, men still get paid less than women. So that is still a challenge we need to overcome. I hope you learned something about the women's movement from one of your more unsuspecting feminists, Mr. Snyder. And so I'll see you back here in class later on. Get your learning targets filled out. Bye-bye.